Hey there. So if you watch my video about inflation, you'll say that inflation is bad because it makes everything expensive. Price value of money drops, and if inflation is too high, everything is in chaos. So you might be wondering, if high inflation means price, then logically, wouldn't minus inflation make prices go down? So minus inflation sounds like a great thing. Why don't all... Well, that condition is called deflation. And even though deflation does make everything cheaper, it's not necessarily. Why? Well, in this video, we will talk about what deflation is, how it works, and why it can be just as bad or worse than inflation. Section 1. What is deflation? Deflation is when prices go down, goes up. Simply put, deflation is just the opposite of inflation. Something that you need to know is that deflation is deflation. Disinflation means inflation is going down. For example, if inflation was 2%, then it went down. It means that the economy still has inflation, but it's less. While deflation means minus inflation. For example, inflation is 1% deflation, and so on. So if inflation makes prices more expensive, then deflation cheaper. Not only that, while inflation makes the value of money go down, deflation makes the value of money go up. For example, used to buy you just one burger. After deflation, that same $3 can buy you the same burger and a drink. Price of the burger went down, and your money's value went up. With the same amount of money, you can now buy not only a burger, but also your money just became more powerful and valuable. Sounds amazing, right? Well, it's not that simple. To understand why, we need to know inflation and its impacts. Section 2. Why does deflation happen? As deflation is just the opposite of causes of deflation are mostly also just the opposite of the causes of inflation. Deflation can happen for different reasons. Talk about the most common ones. The first cause is a decrease in money supply. You probably know that if there's too much money in the it leads to inflation, making prices go up. So what happens if there's too little money? Of course, it causes the opposite. But how does money supply decrease? This usually happens after a major crisis. For example, during the 2008 financial crisis, people who had loans from banks went bankrupt and couldn't repay their debts. To protect themselves, banks stopped lending money. Who could not borrow money, they had less money. When people had less money, they naturally reduced their spending, which led them to buy fewer goods. This decrease in spending causes a drop in demand, which we'll discuss in the next point. The second cause is decrease in demand. That you're a baker who has a bakery that sells bread. A loaf of bread costs $5. Now, let's say every day you can sell loaves of bread to your customers. Well, that's great. As mentioned earlier, the decrease in the money supply means most people have less money. They will lower their spending and save their money. So the impact is now you can only sell 5 loaves of bread out of 10. You notice that demand continues to fall, and you fear your bread won't sell, causing it to go stale. Not only businesses are worried about unsold products piling up, so all businesses, including yours, will naturally lower their prices. As people cannot afford to buy anything, businesses are forced to lower prices to attract buyers, leading to massive price. That's deflation. The third cause is increasing in supply. Continuing from the previous example, because bakeries decrease their production, there's less competition among bakeries to buy wheat. For suppliers, like wheat farmers, oversupply problem. If there are normally 6 bakeries, each buying 2 bags of wheat, a total of 12 bags, reduce 12 bags, then there's no problem. But as deflation hits, let's say 2 bakeries cannot survive and go out of business, only 4 bakeries left. As the demand keeps falling, these 4 bakeries reduce their orders from 2 bags to perhaps 1 real demand is now 4 bags of wheat. While the wheat farmers still produce 12 bags of wheat, this means there's 8 bags of wheat. To avoid letting their wheat go to waste, farmers lower their prices further and decrease their production to match demand. Cheaper wheat, it costs you less to bake bread. However, since demand remains low, you have to continue lowering prices meaning the bakery does not generate more profit. So in this scenario, the wheat price falls, the bread price drops, the prices are falling. At the same time, production is also decreasing. So the economy just keeps shrinking, and that's recession. So those are common reasons why deflation can happen. Of course, there are many other factors that can cause, but for this video, I will keep it simple. Now, let's move on to the next section. Section 3. Is deflation bad? In my video, I explained that low inflation is actually good for the economy. Similarly, low deflation can also be good for the economy, lower prices and make things more affordable. However, just as too much inflation is bad for the economy, too much deflation can be than inflation. The Great Depression of the 1930s in the US, which is regarded as one of the worst financial crises caused by massive deflation. Wait, how can falling prices and the rising value of money cause a crisis? With an example, imagine you work at a shoe factory. Before deflation, your factory was producing and selling shoes at $60. The factory makes 1,000 pairs of shoes every day, and everything is going smoothly. But then, deflation hits, and prices start to fall. The factory notices a drop in shoe demand as well. Before, they could sell all 1,000 pairs of shoes. They're only selling about 800 pairs a day. The factory owner, seeing the falling demand, decides to cut prices to it. So the price of shoes drops from $60 to $55. But people aren't rushing to buy. They think now the price will probably fall even more. I'll just wait until they're cheaper. Also, during deflation, the media will report that which leads people to save their money out of fear. So the factory lowers the price again to $50. Increase slightly, but still not enough. They keep cutting the price to $45, $40, and even lower will hold off. Now, you might say, this isn't a problem, since the materials for the shoes, like rubber, are also seeing a drop in. And you're right. The rubber company that supplies your factory faces less demand, and its rubber stock is piling up, and cuts its prices to attract shoe companies to buy. With this, your shoe factory can keep producing shoes at a lower cost, sell them at a lower price, helping to maintain some profit. But remember, the rubber company cannot lower the price of rubber for a limit, because the rubber company still needs money to extract the rubber from trees and pay the workers. Eventually, when the rubber lowest price they can sell at, and no one wants to buy your factory's shoes, your factory can no longer lower its prices. The factory still has to pay workers' wages, production costs, electricity, and other expenses. So the factory is forced to lay off low profits and cut production from 1,000 pairs of shoes per day to 700 or fewer. At this point, you're a recession. A recession occurs when businesses cut production, causing the economy and GDP to shrink for over 6. So in this situation, let's say you're lucky not to be laid off, but your boss cuts your wages to keep the factory in business. Inflation gets really bad and turns into spiral deflation. The situation worsens. Spiral deflation occurs when businesses collapse, resulting in widespread job losses and even less money circulating in the economy. The rubber company factory goes bankrupt too. Now, your factory is trying to survive by laying off workers, cutting wages, and to 500, 300, or even just 100 pairs of shoes per day. But eventually, the factory gives up and goes back. Now, you've lost your job and income. You try to find another job, but all businesses are collapsing, laying off workers, no vacancies. So you're left in a situation where everything is cheap, but nobody has money to buy anything. This deflation. It can cause a cycle where lower prices lead to lower wages, fewer jobs, and lower demand, which will cause, and if it continues to even lower prices, the economy spirals downward into depression. Depression is when the recession is bad, and that's why too much deflation is actually a nightmare. Since you don't want too much deflation, how can it? Well, that's what we'll talk about in the next section. Section 4. How to control deflation. Since too much and too long not good for the economy, how can deflation be controlled? Well, in the previous inflation video, we've talked about how the central bank and the high inflation and low inflation. So the central bank and the government will use similar methods to control deflation as they do to inflation. As deflation means too little money in the economy, the central bank will use the monetary policy while the government policy to inject more money into the economy and combat deflation. The central bank can control deflation using some monetary policy. Monetary policy is just a fancy term for the decisions they make to adjust interest rates and manage the money supply. Some of their policies. The first one is lowering interest rates. The central bank will lower the interest rates to make borrowing money cheaper for people to take out loans. With more money available, people spend more, helping the economy to recover and ending deflation. Increasing the money supply. The central bank can increase the money supply through expansionary open market operation. The treasuries, like government bonds from commercial banks, at higher prices to inject money into the economy. With more money from the central bank can lend more to people. As all banks have more money to lend, they are also competing to lower their interest rates to lure people. More money, meaning people will have more money and people will spend more. The demand is increasing and business back to operation can end. The third one is quantitative easing. Sometimes lowering interest rates and open market operation are not enough, so the central bank will use quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is when the central bank decides to print new money, of government bonds and corporate bonds to inject money into the economy. This will encourage the government and corporations to spend, increasing inflation. As you know, deflation is the opposite of inflation. So during deflation, the central bank will purpose to beat deflation. While the central bank handles monetary policy, the government uses fiscal policy to control. Fiscal policy is also just a fancy term of decisions taken by the government, like adjusting taxes and spending. So here's some. The first one is lowering taxes. Well, when deflation happens, it means money is too little in the economy. So increase the money supply by letting people to keep more money. The government will reduce taxes so you can keep more money and can spinks, which will cause inflation and escape the deflation. Although the government rarely lowers taxes, but at least this. The second way is by increasing government spending. For example, if the government wants to build a bridge, they will buy materials like more. They will also hire engineers, workers, and other specialists to construct the bridge. Just imagine, by building one bridge, paid. And as you know, there's tons of government projects across the country involving thousands of construction stores, thousands to hundreds of thousands of workers across the country. The projects are also worth millions to even billions of dollars. So with the government spending, it will increase the money supply in the economy, causing inflation and reducing deflation. As I mentioned earlier, methods in more detail in the inflation video, so if you're interested, you can watch the video, link in the description. Section 5, from deflation. Since too much deflation can cause massive unemployment and crises, you might wonder how to protect yourself. Well, there are some strategies that you can use. First, reduce your debt. During deflation, the value of money increases, cash. However, if you have loans or are in debt, deflation can be a nightmare. As the value of money rises, the real value increases. This means you will owe more in real value, making repayment harder, especially when interest is added. Invest in high-quality bonds. Bonds, such as government bonds or highly rated corporate bonds, are considered low risk. During deflation, many investors sell riskier assets like stocks and focus on bonds, seeing them as a safer option. Returns may be low, but fixed income and lower risk make them an attractive choice during economic crises, such as deflation. Maintain a cash reserve. Since deflation increases the value of money, having cash on hand is the best choice. Stocks often during deflation. However, if you want to invest in stocks, focus on companies with high cash reserves and little or no debt, are better positioned to survive during deflation. In conclusion, deflation is when prices go down and money's value goes up, the opposite of inflation. While small short-term deflation can bring benefits like lower prices for goods and services that allow consumers money. However, if deflation lasts long-term, it can create a cycle of reduced spending and investment, leading to lower demand, job losses, increased debt burdens, and eventually a recession or even a depression. That's why most about 2 to 3% inflation per year. Although deflation is rare compared to inflation, understanding both inflation helps us understand the economic landscape better and make informed financial decisions. If you want me to make other videos explain, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.